I never imagined a battered traffic cone and an overly ambitious neighbor would kickstart a full-blown suburban war, let alone one that ended with race cars tearing down my peaceful cul-de-sac. But that's exactly how it began. One ordinary morning, I stepped outside, coffee in hand, mentally preparing for another uninspired day at the office. The crisp air smelled faintly of cut grass, and birds chirped lazily from the oaks lining the street. It was the kind of morning that, in theory, was supposed to set a positive tone for the day ahead. Then I saw it. Right in the middle of my driveway, blindingly orange in the early sunlight, sat a construction cone. Directly behind it was an oversized navy blue Escalade, practically nose-to-nose with my garage door. I blinked. Once. Twice. Maybe if I closed my eyes and opened them again, I'd find it was some sort of optical illusion. But no, reality rebooted, and the cone was still there. So was the car. I knew exactly who it belonged to. Marla. Marla Jensen lived next door. Well, not lived so much as ruled. She was the self-appointed enforcer of our suburban neighborhood, Maplewood Heights. A cul-de-sac of manicured lawns, regulated mailboxes, and an HOA charter that was thicker than a Tolstoy novel. And Marla? She wasn't just a resident. She was the president of the Homeowners Association. Think of her as a small-town tyrant with a clipboard and a terrifying knowledge of zoning laws. This wasn't the first time Marla had parked one of her two SUVs where it didn't belong. But something about the cone screamed escalation. This was no longer a game of passive-aggressive post-it notes or thinly veiled friendly reminders in our mailboxes. This was a declaration of war. I approached the Escalade and knocked on the tinted window, half expecting Marla to be sitting there, sipping her green smoothie and smirking at me through her cat-eye sunglasses. But it was empty. Suppressing the rising irritation, I marched over to her front door and knocked firmly. A few seconds later, it swung open to reveal Marla in full glory. Hair pinned back in an immaculate bun, manicured nails tapping on her iPad, and a smile that made my skin crawl. "Good morning, Nate," she said sweetly. Too sweetly. "Marla," I started, careful to keep my voice even. "Could you move your car? It's blocking my driveway." Her eyes twinkled, and she tilted her head like a crow, sizing up shiny roadkill. As per Section 5, Article 2B of the HOA Guidelines, temporary vehicle placement is permitted for community events. "There's no event," I pointed out flatly. She shrugged. "It's a planning committee meeting. Right here." She motioned vaguely at her doorway. "And as the committee, I'm in session." She crossed her arms and leaned against the frame, effectively ending the conversation. Then she closed the door in my face. I stared at the polished wood for a long second, the urge to punch something crawling up my spine. But I didn't. I turned around, pulled out my phone, and ordered an Uber. This wasn't the first time Marla had pulled something like this. But this time I saw the glint in her eye that told me she wasn't just blocking my driveway for fun. She was making a statement. And I decided then and there that things are going to change. The suburban battlefield. Maplewood Heights was supposed to be a place of peace and order where dogs didn't bark after 9 p.m., lawns never exceeded regulation height, and trash bins were tucked away precisely by 6 p.m. on collection day. It was the kind of neighborhood where people paid extra for an illusion of tranquility. Marla, however, had transformed that illusion into a personal fiefdom. She patrolled the streets like a mall cop with a vendetta. Her yard was a showcase of compliance, her mailbox a fortress of official HOA decrees. At our next HOA meeting, I tried to bring up the parking issue, carefully, diplomatically. I thought maybe if I raised concerns about neighborhood harmony, someone else might chime in. No one did. As soon as I mentioned her name, the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. People shuffled papers, coughed, checked their watches. One guy, old Mr. Dempsey, coughed so hard he almost dislocated something just to avoid eye contact. Marla ruled through fear. And now I was public enemy number one. The escalation begins. I tried small, reasonable steps at first. Painted clear property lines along the edges of my driveway, bright yellow, nothing fancy. Within 24 hours, Marla reported it as graffiti. I installed a security camera aimed at my driveway. Marla filed a noise complaint because it beeped when detecting motion. I posted a simple private driveway, do not block sign. The next day, I found it snapped in half. I even called the city about repeated obstruction. They asked for evidence. I sent them screenshots, footage, timestamps. Marla countered with bylaws, printed and tabbed like a Supreme Court case. She argued I was harassing her freedom of parking. The city backed off. She wasn't just an annoying neighbor. She was a tactical genius, a master of bureaucracy, and I was foolishly playing by the rules. That's when I realized something. If I wanted to win, I had to rewrite the rules entirely. The turning point. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I found my driveway blocked again. Not by her car, but by my own trash bins. They'd been dragged from the curb and stacked carefully to prevent access. I checked the camera. There she was. 7:12 a.m. Sharp. Marla in workout clothes, dragging my bins like some deranged garbage ninja. I submitted the footage to the HOA. Their response? Intent unclear. 2 days later, things hit a boiling point. I walked out for an early client meeting and found a full-blown party tent on my driveway. Folding chairs, balloons, even a cotton candy machine. Marla stood underneath the canopy, handing out lemonade like it was her job. "It's a community gathering," she chirped. "Approved by the HOA. On my property. Without permission." I called the police. They shrugged and told me it was an HOA matter. I called the city. They refer me back to HOA regulations. I was trapped in a bureaucratic loop with Marla standing there smugly at the center of it all. But while I was watching her string up bunting in my driveway, an idea hit me like a thunderclap. Changing the battlefield. Marla was playing a small, petty game. She thrived on obscure rules and passive-aggressive enforcement. But what if I changed the entire game? I dove deep into city regulations, municipal codes, and zoning ordinances. I stayed up late reading legal blogs about HOA abuses. That's where I found it, a clause buried in the city's zoning code. It allowed for temporary reclassification of private streets for public sporting events, specifically athletic development programs. It had been used in other neighborhoods for things like fun runs and youth cycling clinics. But nowhere did it say it couldn't be used for something bigger. That's when it hit me. Motorsports. Opération Grand Prix. I reached out to every motorsports club I could find within 100 miles. Most thought I was insane. A few hung up. But then I found the Apex Track Club, a scrappy group of racing enthusiasts desperate for new training grounds. Their leader, Devin Pierce, thought it was hilarious. "Dude," he said, laughing over the phone, "you want to host a race day in the suburbs? That's the most suburban revenge I've ever heard." "I want her to hear it in her bones," I replied. Devin was in. The paperwork was a nightmare. Diagrams, safety plans, volunteer rosters, community benefit statements. I spent every night filling out forms while Marla dropped off more HOA violations in my mailbox. But eventually, the city approved it. 2 full days of motorsports practice on our street. Sanctioned. Legal. Completely out of Marla's control. D-Day, driveway day. The week leading up to the event, I posted flyers. Neighborhood motorsports training, authorized city event. Marla's reaction was everything I hoped for. She stormed over with a flyer in hand, demanding to know what I was doing. Building community spirit, I told her. "You're all about that, right?" For the next few days, she scrambled. Complaints to the HOA, letters to the city council, petitions about property values and wildlife concerns. She even claimed the engines would traumatize ornamental koi fish. Too late. Engines roar, Marla falls. Saturday morning arrived clear and quiet. For now. By 9 a.m., the street was cordoned off with cones and barriers. 3 race cars gleamed at the starting line. The Apex team set up tents, check-in booths, and safety stations. Families set out lawn chairs. Kids waved flags. And then the engines roared to life. Marla came flying out of her house in a pink bathrobe, clutching her phone like a grenade. She stood on her porch, mouth agape, as Mason, the first driver, peeled down the street in a cloud of legal, sanctioned thunder. By noon, the police had come and gone, satisfied with the permits. Neighbors who had once avoided Marla now smiled and waved at me, some selling lemonade and snacks. Kids raced tricycles between runs. And Marla? She staged a protest with a cardboard sign. When one of the crew politely nudged her aside, she threw herself onto the grass in a melodramatic flop worthy of an Oscar. Phones came out. Videos went viral. By Monday, she was a meme. The fall of Queen Marla. The HOA held an emergency meeting. Marla was stripped of her presidency, removed from every committee. She vanished from public life like a dictator in exile. The neighborhood breathed a sigh of relief. The new HOA president, a practical woman named Diane, reversed most of Marla's policies. The motorsport event was voted an annual tradition. The Apex Club returned every year. The community raised money for local charities. And Marla? She still lived there, but she parked blocks away now and avoided eye contact. The bold white letters near my driveway, NASCAR practice zone, remained. A permanent reminder that sometimes, to beat absurdity, you have to out-crazy it. Epilogue: the Maplewood Grand Prix. A month later, Diane knocked on my door with an idea. Next year, they wanted to expand the event. Soapbox races for kids, tricycle races for adults. They called it the Maplewood Grand Prix. I said yes. From HOA nightmare to neighborhood tradition. All because I refused to let someone block my driveway or my voice.